This is Nick Redding, and you're listening to PreserveCast, a podcast with a worldwide listenership that explores the broad world of preservation from every angle, from drones to mudlarking and everything in between. Now, let's get preserving. Once upon a time, in 1955 to be exact, the Enchanted Forest, a nursery-rhymed-themed amusement park, opened in Ellicott City, Maryland. On this week's PreserveCast, we're looking at how Howard Adler and his team at Adler Display helped to bring the vision of the Enchanted Forest to life. We'll be talking with Ron Adler, Howard's son and the current president of Adler Display, about his father's legacy and the history of this company. This is Nick Redding, and you're listening to PreserveCast. Today, we're excited to be joined by Ron Adler, who is the president and senior account executive at Adler Displays. And we're going to be talking about the work that they do and some of the iconic projects that they've worked on across the state of Maryland that today are historic in their own right, and the work that they do now. But before we jump into all of that, Ron, we're going to talk about you and the family legacy and the cool things that you've worked on, including, of course, the Enchanted Forest. But where'd you grow up, and how do you get into the display business? We've done over 235 episodes of PreserveCast. I don't know if we've talked to a display executive yet. So talk to me a little bit about that and how this all came about.
Yes, we're very rare display executives, but my father, Howard Adler, started the company in 1937, and I was born in 1956, and ever since I was a kid, I had been around. My father would bring me in on weekends, Saturdays, and I would be back in the shop making a mess. But many summers I worked in the business and really enjoyed working with my father. I was very fortunate to have many years together.
So, well, first off, where'd you grow up? Just because people listen from all across the country, so kind of put it in context, and then also talk to us about, like, I'm curious about the early history. So that's really early on, 1937. It's almost, you're coming up on nearly 90 years. What kind of work was he doing early on? So where'd you grow up, and then talk to us about the early days of this company.
Sure. I grew up in Baltimore County, in Pikesville, and the business was in Baltimore City, downtown Baltimore City, for many years. And my father's, he was in the Army during World War II, actually hand lettering. He was an amazing brush lettering and speedball lettering, both lost arts. And would letter planes and bombers with names and also illustrations. And he did a lot of recruiting posters for the Army back then. And that's how he got his start. Came back to Baltimore, worked with, actually in his mother's attic. She had a clothing store on Preston Street. Now the state office buildings. And he was in our attic hand lettering signs for Reed drugstores, if you remember them. Mm-hmm. And did department store windows and bank windows, displays. And that's when he got into the sculpture of sculpting Thomas Edison and the little saying that went along with it. Ben Franklin or any of the icons. And he had actually a sculptor, Basil, came on board, who's a Russian immigrant who was a very talented sculptor who did a lot of the early papier-mâché figures and with chicken wire and then papier-mâché over that for the store windows. So
when you say displays, when people are thinking of displays, it's all, I mean, it's sort of everything under the sun. It's museums. It's, I guess early on, it was a lot of, like, you said drugstores, stuff like that, but I'm guessing like Christmas displays. Is that something that was done? Yeah.
Richard Hoschel Cones downtown had an amazing display outside that my father did for Christmas time. Large, giant Christmas trees made out of fiberglass. and he did a lot of the buildings downtown, the lobby displays for Christmas, and that was a big part of his business.
And I'm curious, do you have nowadays, do you have pictures of you kind of mentioned it, these planes that he illustrated on and put names on and stuff like that? Have you ever come across one of the ones that he actually did? I'm just curious.
I remember seeing photos as a kid. Unfortunately, we had a large fire in 1975. The building, he was on Washington Boulevard and Melbourne Drive, and unfortunately, the building burned to the ground and lost a lot of the photos and a lot of the sculptures.
That's
that
tough.
he had. Yeah. It's now a playground.
So, I mean, it's just fascinating. We talk about this for a long time, and I think people, particularly people who are sort of nostalgic for these old displays and stuff like that, would find all of this interesting. I mean, did they? And I'm also curious because we have sort of this larger audience beyond Maryland. Did Adler end up starting to go regional? Like, did you reach out? I presume you went out beyond Baltimore, and now people can't see this, but you've got a map of the world behind you. I don't know if that's Adler's, plans for global expansion there. Yeah, but talk. I'm just curious, like how big the company got, and then we're going to talk about Enchanted Forest. But what was the scale and scope in these early days, and then as it grew through the mid 20th century?
Well, in the early days, he, of course, Enchanted Forest, and he also created Frontier Town in Ocean City. I think it was pretty regional back then in the surrounding states, and DC certainly was a.
So let's talk about the Enchanted Forest. So people who aren't familiar, we'll put a link in the notes. We interviewed years ago Martha Clark, who is the current owner of it at Clark's Ellie Oak Farm, and so kind of buried the lead here. It doesn't exist where it previously did, but a lot of it has been saved. So it's a nursery rhyme themed amusement park opened near Ellicott City back in 1955. So for those who aren't familiar with it, haven't listened to that episode, paint us a picture, walk us through it as if you're seeing it, and we'll talk then about how your dad got involved. But talk to us a little bit about, sort of paint the picture of what the Enchanted Forest is.
Gosh. It was mainly a Mother Goose nursery rhymes brought to life in 3D, and all the way from you walk into a castle with the introduction, of course, a gift shop and a restaurant, and then walking through the grounds, running to the Three Pigs and Crooked House and other Mother Goose nursery rhymes brought to life. The Woman in the Old Shoe, and it was quite an immersion into that world.
And this is sort of like this golden age of theme parks. I mean, this was pretty small, but I mean, this was people were going to places like this. This is when Disney and others are beginning to open up, and so this is sort of this smaller version of it. How did your dad get involved? Who were the owners behind this? How did he kind of get into building out this place?
Sure. Well, actually, it was Howard Harrison who dreamed about this project. He had, and the owner. He had it was called the Belgian Village Motel in the area that he had themed some of the rooms. One was a candy maker's shop in one of the rooms, or a shoemaker, cobbler, in another room. So he dreamed up the idea and approached my father with that. And that was beginning of the of the Enchanted Forest.
And had he done anything at this scale before? And there'll be pictures and links in the show notes for people to see all of this. But had he done exhibits and displays of this scale? And talk to us about the construction. I think people who are, the preservation construction people listening would be curious how this stuff was actually built. It's pretty fascinating, and it's amazing that it's survived given what it was built out of.
That's true. Well, no, my father, this was by far the largest project my father took on. And he was obviously up for the task. But, of course, especially new was the construction of the buildings. The one challenge was the crooked house that one carpenter who was trying to build it walked off the job and had to find someone who could build a house that the corners weren't our square or level, was one of the big challenges. But he had a great crew of designers. Well, he did most of the design work. He designed everything himself as far as sketching the displays before they were, built by our craftsmen. And back then the figures were all, again, paper mache over chicken wire with a steel structure under it. And then back then they used elastic, which was a fabric that was dipped in acetone that coated the paper mache to make it waterproof.
So sort of like a predecessor to fiberglass?
Yes.
Okay. And so that's how it survived. And then, so did he have a favorite piece of those that he put together out there?
Well, one thing I always remember as a kid, if he went into a lot of classrooms and talked to the kids and, showed them slides of the Enchanted Forest. And one of his favorite pieces was showing them the woman in the shoe and the shoelaces, and have them guess what it's made out of, which was a fire hose. He loved telling that story. Yes.
Very, very creative in that way. And so, this is built in the 50s. Ellicott City, there's just an explosion of growth in that part of the state, like there was everywhere in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And these structures, eventually, actually, the place now is a grocery store. I think it's like a Giant or something like that. Were you involved in rescuing them? Was your dad around to see them preserved and sort of saved? Or how did that... Because I think as a preservation podcast, people are interested in that component. They were almost lost, and now they've been moved to a new site. Were you part of that process as well?
No, unfortunately not. My father had passed away before Martha Clark got involved, and she did an amazing job preserving a lot of the displays and putting it in her petting zoo that she had not far from there.
So why don't we take a quick break here, come back, and then talk about other things your dad and Adler's worked on and what you guys work on now, so people who are listening and maybe needed an exhibit or a display can get a sense for the cool stuff that you're working on. And we'll do that right here on PreserveCast. Historic preservation can't happen without skilled tradespeople to perform the work, and there's a critical need right now for those tradespeople. The Campaign for Historic Trades, powered by Preservation Maryland, is working to meet that need by strengthening apprenticeship opportunities within historic trades. In partnership with the National Park Service's Historic Preservation Training Center and Conservation Legacy, the campaign is currently recruiting for NPS Traditional Trades Apprenticeship Program, or TTAP. TTAP's an intensive 20-week apprenticeship that provides young adults the chance to learn historic trade skills while working on America's most iconic historic sites. Multiple positions are open for the 2022 season at national parks across the country. Visit historictrades.org for more information on TTAP and how to apply today. This is Nick Redding. You're listening to PreserveCast. Today we're joined by Ron Adler. We've been talking with him all about this legacy company that has been involved in so many different cool projects, historic and iconic places around the state of Maryland, Adler Display, and he heads up Adler, following in his father's footsteps. We've been talking about one of their most iconic projects, the Enchanted Forest. You also mentioned that you guys worked on Frontier Town. People might be familiar with that one.
Yes.
you want to just kind of mention it for people who are listening? And what's the current status of Frontier Town?
Actually, Frontier Town was built a few years afterwards, and it's still up and running today. It's been up for over 50 years, and it's funny. I went there a few years ago, and it looks exactly as I remembered as a child. And still, they haven't solved the train getting robbed every day at 10 and 2, or and there's a gunfight in the street, in the saloon with the dancers. It's I think everything is, I remember as it was in the 50s.
Yeah, it's a sort of almost a time capsule there. So what else did your dad work on? Other, how did the company kind of change? And then you came in when, and what do you guys work on now?
Well, I remember as a kid in high school, and even before that, I used to come in, and one of the great projects we had was working. We were the first company subcontracted to from Disney. We created the Snow White house, and for holiday time at different department stores, at different malls, we would create Christmas displays. The kids would, of course, come into that everywhere from the Small World exhibit to Main Street and Snow White's house and the Seven Dwarfs. And I remember as a kid, friends of mine in school would come in on Saturdays with me. And matter of fact, it's funny, I ran into a high school friend at the airport the other day, and first thing he said to me is he remembers as a kid coming in and helping with Snow White's house. So we have great memories of working on projects.
And when did you start working with Adler, and what do you give us a sense for sort of the scale and scope of your work today?
Sure. Well, like I said, I worked there since I could walk. And then I went to the Maryland Institute College of Art and Parsons School of Design, and came back and worked in the business since then. So I officially took over in 1986 as president.
Wow. So you've been running it for 36 years?
Yeah.
You said 86?
Yeah. So, and fortunately had a great relationship with my father. We got to work together for many years before he passed. So that was very special. But today we're in Baltimore County, haven't moved too far, and a nice quiet industrial park that's with a very contemporary building. And we have a full woodworking shop and a team of designers, as well as large format printing, wall murals, and custom displays. We do work for hospitals and schools, history walls, and donor recognition displays.
Are there projects here in Maryland or around the country that people would be familiar with? Yeah.
Actually, one thing we just finished up was for the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. We did for the football facility a display about in the Belichick Library, talking about the football team and our history and large iconic images of and our logo on the wall. And that's been a great project for us, as well as Firaxis, who makes games, video games in Baltimore County. They're located in Baltimore County in Hunt Valley, and we created again a history displays of their company and all the games again in 3D coming to life.
Very cool. Well, we have links in the show notes if people are looking to get a display put together or have an idea and want to see it fabricated, and they can get in touch with you. Last question we ask everyone, beyond the Enchanted Forest, what's your favorite historic place or site? It can be anywhere.
Oh, gosh. I've always loved Fort McHenry, I would say. I remember as a kid always going there for field trips and going there with my parents and learning about our history, the Star Spangled Banner. Definitely one of my favorite spots.
Well, this is great and so interesting and kind of connects the dots between that previous episode we did where we talked about saving it. And now we know the story of who put it all together and how he got his start lettering World War II bombers and airplanes. A great connection there. So, Ron, thanks so much for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you out in the field and seeing your displays around the state.
Great, Nick. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to PreserveCast. To dig deeper into this episode's story, head over to PreserveCast.org for show notes and our collection of previous episodes. Don't forget to engage with this podcast by subscribing, commenting, and leaving a review. Follow along on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at PreserveCast for even more. PreserveCast is currently recorded in Walkersville, Maryland. It's sponsored by the 1772 Foundation and powered by Preservation Maryland. Thanks for listening, and keep on preserving.